During the brutal winter of 1888, thousands of lumberjacks faced temperatures of 40 below zero in the remote forests of Wisconsin, armed with nothing but axes, saws, and their own ingenuity. One mistake meant certain death in this frozen wilderness, where the nearest town was days away. Yet somehow, these men managed to create shelters that kept them alive through months of blizzards and bone-shattering cold. Here's how lumberjacks built and survived in the life-saving bunkhouses of America's northern forests. If you use these to fall asleep, hit subscribe so you don't miss any. Comment where you're at and the time too. Kind of fun seeing all the different places. Someone from Iceland commented once and I had to Google what time zone that even is. Okay, tonight it's winter in a frozen logging camp. But hold on, get yourself comfortable first. I mean it. Fix your pillows, grab that blanket. This one's worth settling in for. The morning alarm is the harsh clanging of a steel triangle at 4:30 a.m. You jolt awake in the dim light of the bunkhouse, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke, wet wool and unwashed bodies. Your breath forms clouds in the frigid air even inside the building. The massive cast-iron stove in the centre of the room glows red hot, but the corners of the room are still cold enough to freeze water. You're huddled under 3 heavy wool blankets on your bunk, packed tightly against other men like sardines in a can. Your beard has frost in it just from your breath while sleeping. Nothing like your warm, comfortable bed right now with its clean sheets and controlled temperature. Jesus, it's cold, mutters the man next to you, his voice barely audible over the howling wind outside. The wind finds every tiny gap in the log walls, creating a constant mournful whistle. Outside it's still pitch black. Dawn won't break for hours, and when it does, it'll be weak and watery. This is your first winter in a logging camp, and you're beginning to wonder if it'll be your last. First winter? Asks an older man as he pulls on wool socks that are still damp from yesterday. You get used to it. Sort of. The year is 1888, and you're a lumberjack in northern Wisconsin. You arrived in the fall with about 100 other men, all drawn by the promise of steady work and decent pay. The logging companies are hungry for timber, especially the towering white pines that grow in abundance here. But to harvest them in winter, when the frozen ground makes it easier to transport massive logs, you need shelter. And not just any shelter, one that can keep 100 men alive through temperatures that would freeze spit before it hits the ground. You swing your legs over the edge of your bunk and wince as your feet touch the floor. The floor is literally frozen earth. In the more permanent camps, they might put down rough planks, but here it's just packed dirt, hard as concrete. A layer of straw provides minimal insulation. Your toes immediately start to ache with cold. The bunkhouse is a massive structure, about 30 feet wide and 70 feet long. 2 rows of bunks line the long walls stacked too high, with just enough room for a man to lie down. There's no privacy, no personal space, just wool blankets and bodies generating precious heat. Up and at 'em, ladies! The foreman's voice booms through the bunkhouse. Breakfast in 10 minutes, then we're heading out. Gonna be a cold one today. You look around and think, cold one? What exactly does he think it's been so far? Wait till it hits 50 below, says the old-timer, seemingly reading your mind. This here's practically springtime. I spent like 3 weeks researching these bunkhouses. You know what was the craziest thing I found out? The fire. Keeping that fire going was literally life or death. In the centre of the bunkhouse stands the massive cast-iron stove, the beating heart of the entire operation. It's not like your modern heater with its digital thermostat and safety features. This thing is a monster. 4 feet long, 3 feet wide, and 3 feet high. Right now, it's glowing red hot, stuffed with logs. The stovepipe runs the entire length of the building before exiting through the roof, acting like one long radiator. The youngest guy in camp, maybe 16, is poking at the fire, adding another massive log. This is the chore boy, and his job might be the most important one in camp. "You sleep?" you ask him. He laughs. 2 hours at a time, gotta wake up to feed the fire through the night. Let it die, and we all might not wake up. And he's not exaggerating. At 40 below zero, a few hours without that fire would be a death sentence. The chore boy has learned to read the fire like a book, knowing exactly when to add fuel and how much. Too little, and the temperature drops dangerously. Too much, and the stove overheats, creating a fire hazard that could burn the whole place down. The smell in the bunkhouse is something else entirely. Think about this. 100 men who haven't bathed in months. Wet wool socks and long johns hanging from wires above the stove, steaming and filling the air with the smell of drying fabric. The sharp tang of pine smoke, sweat and dirt and tobacco. Your nose hasn't adjusted. You're not sure it ever will. You stand up and stretch, your muscles aching from yesterday's labour. Felling trees with a crosscut saw is brutal work, especially in this cold. Your hands are calloused and cracked, and your back feels twice as old as the rest of you. You know what the secret is? The old-timer is still talking to you as he laces up his boots. Layers. Lots and lots of layers. And never ever get wet. Wet means dead out here. He's not kidding. You've already seen what happens when someone stays wet too long in this cold. Last week, a guy named Erickson got his feet wet crossing a stream. By evening, his toes were black with frostbite. They sent him south on the next supply sleigh. Word is he lost 3 toes. "Move it! Move it!" the foreman again. "Sun's not going to wait for you lazy bastards." Not that you'll see much sun today. The sky is a flat grey ceiling pregnant with snow. The blizzard that blew in last night is still raging, the wind screaming around the eaves of the bunkhouse. The logs that form the walls creak and settle with the cold. "We working in this?" you ask no one in particular. A chorus of laughter rises from the men around you. Unless you're bleeding from your eyeballs. "You're working," says a burly man with a red beard. "Company's got quotas. Trees don't cut themselves." You grab your wool cap and pull it down over your ears. Next comes your coat, made of thick wool with a collar you can pull up around your face. Your mittens are still damp from yesterday, but you have no choice but to put them on. As you do, you notice the chapped red skin of your wrists where the cold has been nibbling away at your flesh. Outside, the world is white. The snow is piled 3 feet high around the bunkhouse, with drifts reaching nearly to the roof in places. The wind whips snow into your face the moment you step outside, the tiny crystals feeling like needles against your exposed skin. The cookhouse is another log building about 50 feet away. You can see warm light spilling from its windows, and the thought of hot food is the only thing that gets your feet moving through the snow. The path between buildings has been trampled down by many boots, but the new snow is already filling it in. When you finally push open the door to the cookhouse, the warm air hits you like a physical force. Here, several massive wood-burning stoves generate enough heat to cook for 100 hungry men. The long tables are already filling up, men stomping snow from their boots and unwrapping the layers around their faces. Get it while it's hot, boys. The cook, a round man with forearms like hams, is sliding stacks of pancakes onto plates. Next to the pancakes are huge slabs of salt pork, fried until crisp. You find a space on one of the benches and sit down. A plate appears in front of you, a stack of pancakes 8 high, half a pound of salt pork and a tin cup of coffee so strong it could probably dissolve a spoon if you left it in too long. "Eat up," says the man next to you. "You'll need it." He's not wrong. Lumberjacks burn through calories like a fire through dry kindling. You've heard estimates of 6,000 calories a day, and after a few weeks here you believe it. The work is physically demanding in a way that's hard to comprehend unless you've done it. Swinging axes and pulling saws through frozen wood for 12 hours a day requires fuel, and lots of it. The pancakes are basic, just flour, water, and baking powder. But when you're this hungry, they taste like heaven. The salt pork is fatty and salty, providing the energy you'll need. The coffee is bitter but hot, and you feel it warming you from the inside. "First time seeing Cookie make pancakes?" asks a grizzled man across the table. "Watch this." He nods toward the cook, who is standing in front of a griddle the size of a door. With practiced efficiency, he's pouring batter from a massive bowl, creating perfect circles across the hot surface. In minutes, he's flipped and stacked over 100 pancakes. "Man can feed 100 hungry lumberjacks in 20 minutes flat," says your table mate with something like reverence. "Best cook in 3 counties. Company pays him more than the foreman." That's surprising, but it shouldn't be. A good cook is worth his weight in gold in a logging camp. Men will stay through the worst conditions if the food is good. A bad cook? The camp will empty out faster than you can say flapjack. You're halfway through your stack when the foreman stands up at the head table. "All right, men, here's how it's going to go today. Blizzard's still blowing, but we've got that stand of white pine northwest of camp that needs to come down. Jensen's crew will take the lead. Peterson, your boys will handle the skidding. The rest of you know your jobs." There's a collective groan around the cookhouse. Going out in a blizzard means more than discomfort. It means danger. But the company has contracts to fulfill, and the logs need to get to the river before the spring thaw. You gulp down the rest of your coffee and prepare to head out. The warmth of the cookhouse already seems like a distant memory as you pull your cap down and brace yourself for the wall of cold waiting just outside the door. "Stay close to your partner out there," warns the old-timer as you both head for the door. Man can get lost 10 feet from the trail in weather like this. They won't find you till spring thaw. That's not an exaggeration. Every year men disappear in the woods. Sometimes they're found come spring, frozen solid, perfectly preserved like grotesque statues. Sometimes they're never found at all, just became another ghost story told around the stove on winter nights. The moment you step outside, the cold slaps you across the face like a physical blow. The wind has picked up, driving snow horizontally across the clearing. The other buildings of the camp, the office, the tool shed, the stable, are barely visible through the white haze. "Grab your saw!" the foreman is shouting to be heard above the wind. "And for God's sake, stay together." You and the old-timer collect your tools from the shed. The crosscut saw is 6 feet long, with teeth designed to cut in both directions. It takes 2 men to operate it, one on each end, pulling back and forth in a rhythm that, once established, can fell enormous trees with surprising efficiency. The axes are for trimming branches and cutting the logs to length. The handles are worn smooth from years of use, the heads kept razor sharp. A dull axe is not just inefficient, it's dangerous. Your crew, about 20 men, forms a ragged line and begins trudging through the snow toward the stand of pines. The going is tough, with snow up to your knees in places. Your wool pants are already wet to the thigh, and you can feel the cold creeping in. Wet means dead, the old-timer had said. But there's no staying dry in these conditions. After what feels like hours, but is probably only 40 minutes, you reach the section of forest marked for cutting. The white pines tower overhead, their trunks straight and massive. Some are over 150 feet tall, with diameters of 3 feet or more. Each one will yield hundreds of board feet of lumber, enough to build several houses. This one first, the foreman points to a particularly impressive specimen. You and the old-timer position yourselves on either side of the trunk. The first task is to make the face cut, a V-shaped notch that will determine which way the tree falls. The old-timer eyes the tree, considering wind direction and the natural lean of the trunk. "We want it to fall that way," he says, pointing. "Away from the other trees we'll be cutting, ready?" You nod, gripping your end of the saw. The old-timer is on the other side, and together you begin the rhythmic pull and push that will cut through the frozen wood. The saw bites into the bark, then the pale sapwood beneath. A fine spray of sawdust dusts the snow at your feet. The work is hard but warming. Soon, despite the brutal cold, you're sweating under your layers. This is another danger. Sweat can freeze against your skin once you stop moving, pulling away body heat just when you need it most. "Steady pace," grunts the old-timer. "Don't rush it." It takes nearly an hour to make the proper cuts. Finally, the old-timer steps back. She's ready. "Timber!" The warning shout echoes through the forest. Everyone stops what they're doing and looks up, tracking the path of the falling giant. There's a moment of silence, then a series of sharp cracks as wood fibres begin to tear. The massive trunk starts to lean, slowly at first, then gathering speed. The rush of air as it falls sounds like a freight train. When it hits the ground, the impact shakes the earth beneath your feet. One down, dozens more to go, and the day has barely begun. By midday your muscles are screaming. The cold has wormed its way into every crack in your clothing, every exposed bit of skin. Your beard is frozen solid, and your eyelashes are crusted with ice from your own breath. But the work continues. Tree after tree falls, and then comes the even harder work of trimming branches and cutting the trunks into manageable sections that can be skidded back to camp by the team of oxen. Lunch is eaten where you stand. From your pocket you pull a thick sandwich wrapped in oiled paper. The bread is homemade, dense and heavy, with a thick slab of cold roast beef in the middle. There are also a couple of molasses cookies, specially made to resist freezing even in this cold. "Put it inside your coat for a few minutes," advises the old-timer, demonstrating with his own sandwich. Warms it up a bit. You follow his lead, tucking the sandwich inside your coat against your body. It's a strange sensation, but after a few minutes, when you pull it out again, at least the bread isn't frozen solid. The men eat quickly, huddled in whatever shelter they can find from the wind. There's little talk. Everyone is focused on the food and on conserving energy. Some men have brought small metal flasks filled with hot coffee or tea. A few have something stronger, though the company officially prohibits alcohol in the camps. "Half hour," calls the foreman, checking his pocket watch, then back to it. You finish your sandwich and cookies, brushing crumbs from your beard. The brief rest has allowed the cold to creep back in, and you stamp your feet to keep the blood flowing. Your toes are numb, and you wiggle them inside your boots, hoping to feel something. "First few weeks are the hardest," says the old-timer watching you. "Body adjusts, believe it or not. Mind, too." You're not sure you believe him. How does anyone adjust to this? It seems more like endurance than adaptation. But looking around at the other men, some of whom have been doing this for decades. You have to wonder, maybe there is a way to make peace with the brutal cold, the back-breaking labour, the isolation. Or maybe they're all just crazy. You haven't ruled that out yet. The afternoon passes in a blur of sawdust and sweat and numbing cold. By the time the foreman calls an end to the day, you've felled and processed over a dozen massive pines. The logs will be skidded back to camp over the next few days, then stockpiled until they can be floated downriver during the spring log drive. The walk back to camp feels twice as long as the morning journey. Every step is an effort, your legs like lead, your lungs burning from the cold air. The only thing keeping you going is the thought of the bunkhouse stove and hot food. Dusk is falling as you finally stumble back into the clearing where the camp buildings huddle against the wilderness. Smoke rises from the cookhouse chimney, and light spills from the windows of the bunkhouse. Never has such a rough place looked so much like heaven. Your first stop is the bunkhouse. You need to get out of your wet clothes before heading to supper. Inside, the stove is roaring, and the air is thick with steam from wet wool and human bodies. Men are stripping off layers, hanging socks and mittens on the lines strung above the stove. "Rough one today," comments a man already in dry clothes. He's sitting on the long bench that runs the length of the room, what they call the deacon seat. It's where men gather in the evening to talk, smoke, and repair their gear. You just nod, too tired for words. You peel off your frozen outer layers, wincing as your fingers, thawing in the heat, begin to tingle painfully. You change into your only other set of clothes, nearly identical to the ones you just took off but dry. The wet ones go up on the line where they'll hopefully dry before tomorrow. "Supper bell's about to ring," says the man on the deacon seat. "Better hurry if you want anything hot." As if on cue, the clang of the cook's triangle sounds across the camp. There's an immediate stampede for the door, men pushing and jostling good-naturedly. No one wants to miss out on the best part of the day, the evening meal. The cookhouse is a wall of heat and noise after the quiet cold of outside. Men crowd around the long tables, talking and laughing as they wait for the food. The events of the day, the trees that gave trouble, the close calls, the jokes played on the greenhorns, are recounted and embellished. Tonight's meal is a feast by logging camp standards. Roast beef, mashed potatoes swimming in gravy, baked beans, fresh bread with butter, and for dessert, apple pie. The portions are enormous. Each man gets over a pound of meat and 2 pounds of potatoes, plus all the bread and beans he can eat. You fall on the food like a starving wolf, suddenly aware of the hollow pit in your stomach. The day's work has burned through your breakfast and lunch as if they never happened. The meat is tender, the gravy rich, the potatoes creamy. The cook may not have much to work with, but he knows how to make it taste good. "Save room for pie," advises the red-bearded man sitting across from you. "Cookie's apple pie is worth saving room for." He's right. The pie, when it comes, is still warm from the oven, the crust flaky, the filling sweet and spiced with cinnamon. Each man gets an entire pie to himself, not a slice, but a whole small pie, about 6 inches across. In a world where sugar is a luxury, this is decadence. After supper, with bellies full and the worst of the day's fatigue pushed back, most men return to the bunkhouse. Some will head straight to their bunks to sleep, especially those who've drawn the early morning shifts. Others gather on the deacon seat for what passes as social time in a logging camp. Back in the bunkhouse, the stove has been built up to a roaring blaze. The chore boy is carefully adding logs, making sure it will burn through the night. Around the stove, men are engaged in various activities. Some are playing cards, betting with matchsticks or pennies. Others are mending clothes or repairing tools. A few are writing letters home, their rough hands awkward around pencils. In one corner a man has taken out a fiddle and is tuning it. Another has a harmonica. Music is an important part of bunkhouse life, one of the few entertainments available in the isolated winter camps. You find a spot on the deacon seat and sink down with a groan. Every muscle in your body aches. Your hands are blistered despite your gloves, and your feet throb painfully as they warm up. First day's the worst, says the old-timer settling beside you. Second day's worse. After that it gets better. Sort of. The fiddler strikes up a lively tune, and the man with the harmonica joins in. Someone starts singing, a song about a lumberjack and a farmer's daughter that gets progressively more bawdy with each verse. Men laugh and join in on the chorus. For a moment, sitting here in the warmth with a full belly and music in the air, the brutal reality of the logging camp recedes. These men have created something remarkable here, a pocket of humanity in the midst of an unforgiving wilderness. The bunkhouse, rough as it is, stands between them and certain death in the frozen forest. And somehow, against all odds, they're not just surviving, they're living. Tomorrow will bring another day of brutal cold and back-breaking labour. But tonight, in the red glow of the stove, with the wind howling outside unable to reach you, there's a strange kind of contentment. You've survived your first day. Perhaps you'll make it through the winter after all. Outside, the blizzard continues to rage. Snow piles against the bunkhouse walls, and the wind screams through the trees. But inside, men laugh and sing and share stories. The stove glows red hot, and life goes on in the heart of the frozen north. Your eyes open at 4:30 a.m. again, but today you're not in your bunk. You're 3 months earlier, back in late September 1890. The morning air is crisp, but not yet brutal. You've just arrived at the site that will become the winter logging camp, part of a team of about 30 men. Most are veterans of multiple logging seasons, but there's a handful of greenhorns like you, drawn by stories of good wages and the promise of adventure in the North Woods. There's nothing here yet. Just a clearing in the vast forest of white pine and spruce, chosen for its proximity to both the timber you'll be harvesting and a small stream that will provide water through the winter months. The nearest town is almost 40 miles away, basically another world once the snows come. "Welcome to your new home, boys," says the foreman, a grizzled man named Mackenzie with a thick beard and forearms like tree trunks. "Or it will be, once we build it. That's why you're here early, weeks before the main crew arrives. Your first job isn't cutting timber for the mill, it's building the camp itself. And the most important building, the one that will determine whether you live or die once winter hits, is the bunkhouse." "We've got maybe 5 weeks before the first heavy snow," Mackenzie continues, surveying the clearing. "Need the bunkhouse up in 3, cookhouse in 4? Questions?" A lanky guy next to you raises his hand. "What if we don't finish in time?" Mackenzie just stares at him. "Then start praying, son. The urgency isn't theatrical, it's survival. You've heard stories of crews caught without proper shelter when the first blizzards hit. Those stories don't have happy endings." "All right, we start with timber selection," Mackenzie announces. "Peterson, take 5 men and mark the straightest white pines and spruces within half a mile. Johnson, your team handles felling. O'Malley, you're on skidding duty. Rest of you start clearing the building site. Move." I spent hours researching how these guys pick trees for buildings versus trees for lumber mills. Totally different criteria. For the bunkhouse, they needed perfectly straight logs with minimal taper, basically the highest quality trees that would normally go for top dollar at the mill. But when your life depends on it, you don't skimp on materials. You're assigned to Peterson's timber selection team. He's a tall, thin man with a perpetual squint, like he's always looking into the sun. "Listen up," Peterson says once your small group is assembled. "We're looking for white pine or spruce, straight as an arrow, minimum 12 inches diameter, preferably 18. No knots if we can help it. No rot, no insect damage." "How do we check for rot?" you ask. Peterson pulls a small hammer from his belt. You knock on it. Solid wood rings. Rot sounds dull. Dead. He demonstrates on a nearby tree, and you hear the sharp, clear tone of healthy wood. Your team spreads out through the forest, examining trees with critical eyes. When you find one that meets the criteria, you mark it with a slash of red paint. By midday, you've marked about 40 suitable trees, which Peterson says should be enough for the bunkhouse walls. Meanwhile, Johnson's felling team is already at work. These men operate with an efficiency that borders on artistry. 2 men to a cross-cut saw. They make precise cuts that bring the massive trees down exactly where they want them. It's dangerous work. A tree falling the wrong way can crush a man in an instant. Back at the clearing, the ground preparation team has been busy. They've removed trees, stumps, and surface rocks from the bunkhouse site, creating a level area about 35 by 85 feet. "Bigger than I expected," you comment to an older worker as you return with Peterson. "Needs to hold 100 men through winter," he replies. "Close quarters, but better than freezing to death." You watch as the first felled trees are skidded into the clearing by teams of oxen. These enormous beasts, each weighing over a ton, strain against their harnesses as they drag logs weighing thousands of pounds through the forest. The skidding paths have been carefully chosen to avoid obstacles, but it's still brutal work for both animals and the men guiding them. "Next step is peeling and seasoning," Mackenzie announces once a good number of logs have been collected. "Show of hands. Who's worked a draw knife before?" Several hands go up, including yours. You'd worked one summer at your uncle's furniture shop where you'd learned to peel bark from smaller logs. Good. Grab a knife and get to work. I want every log peeled by sundown. Bark stays on, we get bugs and rot. Bad news in winter. The draw knives are simple tools, a blade with handles at each end that you pull toward you to strip away bark. Simple, but using one all day is exhausting work. You straddle a log and begin peeling, the blade biting into the rough bark and revealing the smooth, pale wood beneath. "Why do we bother peeling them?" asks a young greenhorn working the log next to yours. "Seems like a lot of work for a temporary building." An older worker chuckles. "Temporary? Son, this bunkhouse will stand for years, and you'll thank God we peeled these logs when you're not sharing your bunk with 1,000 insects come January." By sundown your hands are blistered despite your calluses, and every muscle in your back and shoulders screams from the repetitive motion of peeling logs. But the work is done. Dozens of massive logs lie stripped of bark, their pale surfaces already beginning to dry in the open air. "We'll let them season for a few days," Mackenzie says, surveying the day's work with satisfaction. Shrinks them a bit, makes for a tighter fit. Meanwhile, we start on the foundation tomorrow. That night, you sleep under the stars with the rest of the crew. The September air has a bite to it, a warning of what's to come. But huddled in your wool blanket near the campfire, listening to the sounds of the forest and the low conversations of the men around you, there's a strange satisfaction. You're building something that matters, something that will keep men alive through the brutal months ahead. Morning comes too soon, announced by the cook banging on a steel triangle. He set up a temporary kitchen with a simple fire pit and some cast-iron cookware. Breakfast is a mountain of flapjacks and salt pork, washed down with strong black coffee. Nobody complains about the rough conditions. Everyone knows this is just temporary until the proper cookhouse is built. Foundation day, Mackenzie announces once everyone is fed. Hardest damn part of the whole operation. He's not exaggerating. In the frozen north, a traditional foundation isn't an option. By winter, the ground will be frozen solid to a depth of 3 or 4 feet, making digging impossible. The solution is both ingenious and incredibly labour-intensive. We're doing mudsill construction, Mackenzie explains to the newer men. Need 20 flat stones, each about 2 feet across, 300 pounds minimum. Seeing your confused expression, an older worker named Schmidt leans over. It's like this. We place the stones on the ground around the perimeter, 8 feet apart. First course of logs sits on these stones, keeps the wood off the ground, prevents rot. Finding suitable stones means combing the surrounding forest and stream beds. When a potential foundation stone is located, it takes 4 men with wooden poles to lever it onto a skid and then have the oxen drag it back to the building site. Hang on, you say to Schmidt as you help wrestle a particularly stubborn stone onto a skid. Won't these stones shift when the ground freezes and thaws? Schmidt grins. Now you're thinking like a builder. Yes, they'll shift some. That's why we use such big ones. More stable. And the weight of the building helps keep everything in place. It's not perfect, but it works. By mid-afternoon, all 20 foundation stones have been positioned around the perimeter of the building site. Now comes the placement of the sill logs, the first and most critical course of logs that will bear the weight of the entire structure. These need to be your straightest, strongest logs, Mackenzie explains as the oxen drag the selected timbers into position. No compromise. The sill logs are massive, at least 20 inches in diameter and perfectly straight for their entire 30-foot length. Watching the men manoeuvre them into position on top of the foundation stones is like watching a choreographed dance, albeit one where a mistake could crush someone's leg or worse. We'll use a saddle notch for the corners, Mackenzie tells the crew as the first logs are positioned. Simple, strong, and any idiot can cut one if they're shown how. The saddle notch is exactly what it sounds like. A curved notch cut into the bottom of one log to fit snugly over the top of the log beneath it. But the simplicity of the concept belies the skill required to execute it properly. Depth of the notch needs to be about 1/4 of the log diameter, explains a carpenter named Miller as he demonstrates the technique. Too shallow, the joint's weak. Too deep, you compromise the structural integrity of the log. The notching is done with axes and adzes, tools that are lethal in inexperienced hands. You're paired with Schmidt to work on notching one corner of the bunkhouse. He's patient but exacting, showing you how to shape the notch to create a tight fit. See how I'm cutting it? Follow the curve of the log below, make it snug. Winter wind finds any gap, no matter how small. It takes your team most of the afternoon to complete the notches for just the first course of logs. As the sun begins to set, Mackenzie inspects each corner, occasionally ordering adjustments where the fit isn't tight enough. Not bad for the first day, he concedes, which from him is high praise. Tomorrow we start building up the walls, real test of your notching skills. That night, muscles aching from the unaccustomed labour, you sit by the fire with Schmidt and a few others. The talk turns to previous winters in logging camps, and the stories make your stomach knot with anxiety. Winter of 88. Thermometer hit 50 below, says an older logger named Erickson. Found a man frozen solid just 20 yards from the bunkhouse. Got disoriented in a whiteout, wandered in circles till he fell. Didn't find him till morning. That the same winter the Johnson Creek camp lost their stovepipe, asks another man. Erickson nods grimly. Collapsed under snow weight. Filled the bunkhouse with smoke. Had to evacuate in the middle of a blizzard. Lost 8 men that night. You stare into the fire, suddenly very aware of how critical your current work is. You're not just building a shelter, you're building a fortress against death itself. That's why we don't cut corners, Schmidt says quietly, seeming to read your thoughts. That's why Mackenzie's such a hard-ass about every notch, every log. When it's 40 below and the wind's howling, you'll be damn glad we took our time now. The next few days establish a rhythm. Wake at dawn, eat a quick breakfast, then work on the bunkhouse walls until twilight, stopping only for a brief midday meal. The walls grow higher as course after course of logs is added, each requiring careful notching and fitting. As the walls rise, you develop a newfound respect for the skilled builders among you. Men like Schmidt and Miller seem to have an intuitive understanding of how logs should fit together, how to compensate for irregularities, how to create a structure that's both strong and relatively airtight. Trick is working with the logs, not against them, Schmidt explains as he helps you fit a particularly troublesome log into place. Every tree's different. Gotta let the wood tell you where it wants to go. By the end of the first week, the bunkhouse walls stand nearly complete, about 8 feet high all around. Now comes one of the most crucial steps, chinking. Chinking's what keeps you alive in January, Mackenzie announces. Any gaps between logs, wind gets through, heat gets out, you freeze to death. Simple math. The chinking process is an art form in itself. First, long strips of sphagnum moss are stuffed into the gaps between logs. This moss, gathered from wet areas of the forest, has natural antiseptic properties and excellent insulating qualities. Over this, a mortar made from clay-rich soil mixed with chopped straw is applied, creating an airtight seal. In the coldest camps, they'd add a layer of pine pitch over the chinking, Schmidt tells you as you work side by side stuffing moss into gaps. Waterproof barrier. Might do that here if the winter's looking especially harsh. The chinking process takes 2 full days, with every man pitching in. It's meticulous work, ensuring that every crack and crevice is sealed against the coming cold. By the end, your fingers are raw from pushing moss into gaps, and you're covered from head to toe in clay mortar. Not pretty, but it'll keep the wind out, Mackenzie says, inspecting the completed chinking. Now for the really tricky part, the roof. The roof is the most critical part of the entire structure. It needs to support several feet of snow while keeping the interior dry. The design is a simple gable, but executing it requires both strength and precision. First comes the ridge beam, the backbone of the entire roof system. It's a massive log, almost 24 inches in diameter and running the full 80-foot length of the building. Just getting it into position requires the entire crew, plus both teams of oxen. Careful, careful, Mackenzie shouts, as the massive beam is slowly raised into position. Drop that thing, someone's getting crushed! The ridge beam is supported by a series of vertical posts called king posts, spaced every 12 feet along the length of the building. Once the ridge beam is secure, the rafters can be added. These are smaller logs, about 8 to 10 inches in diameter, that run from the ridge beam down to the top of the wall. Each rafter needs to be notched twice, Miller explains to your team. Once to fit over the ridge beam, once to fit over the top log of the wall. The notching is precise work and there's no room for error. A poorly fitted rafter could shift under snow load, potentially causing the entire roof to fail. You work with particular care, measuring twice before making any cut. Once all the rafters are in place, spaced 24 inches apart, the next step is the roof decking. This consists of rough sawn planks, typically 1 inch thick and 12 inches wide, laid perpendicular to the rafters. Where'd these come from, you ask Schmidt, noting that these are the first processed lumber you've seen in camp. Brought 'em in with us, he replies. Some things you can't improvise on site, need proper sawmill for planks. The planks are nailed in place with square cut iron nails, creating a solid surface over the rafters. Next comes a layer of birch bark, laid as a moisture barrier. Birch bark is naturally waterproof and flexible enough to conform to the irregular surface of the planks. Used to be all they had, Schmidt comments as you help lay the birch bark. Before tar paper came along, Indians used it for canoes, you know. Completely waterproof if you lay it right. Over the birch bark goes a layer of tar paper, a relatively new invention that creates a flexible, waterproof membrane. The tar paper is laid in overlapping courses, starting at the bottom edge of the roof and working upward, with each course overlapping the one below by at least 6 inches. Final touch, Mackenzie announces once the tar paper is complete. Sod layer. This surprises you. Sod? On a roof? Schmidt chuckles at your confusion. Insulation and weight. Keeps heat in. Holds the tar paper down in high winds. The sod is cut from a nearby meadow in squares about 18 inches across and 6 inches deep. These heavy pieces are passed hand to hand up to the roof, where they're carefully laid to create a smooth, even surface. The weight of the sod, about 80 pounds per square foot, helps secure everything beneath it. Some camps add cedar shingles on top of the sod, Schmidt tells you as you position another square of earth. Makes it last longer. Might do that next year if this becomes a permanent camp. By the time the roof is complete, you've been working on the bunkhouse for nearly 2 weeks. The structure is impressive. A massive rectangular building made entirely from materials harvested within a mile of the site. But there's still more to do. Floor next, Mackenzie announces. This camp's going to be here a few years, so we're doing a proper plank floor, not just dirt. This is a luxury you hadn't expected. Many temporary winter camps make do with the frozen earth as a floor, perhaps covered with straw or pine boughs. But a wooden floor will make the bunkhouse significantly more comfortable and healthier for the men who'll spend the winter here. The floor joists are laid directly on the ground, which has been carefully levelled and tamped down. Over these go rough-sawn planks similar to those used for the roof. The planks are secured with nails, creating a solid surface throughout the bunkhouse. Gaps between planks, you ask, noticing that the floorboards don't fit perfectly tight against each other. Intentional, Schmidt replies. Wood expands and contracts with temperature and humidity. Leave a little gap. Boards don't buckle when they swell. With the floor complete, attention turns to the interior. The bunks are simple wooden frames built against the long walls stacked too high. Each bunk is just big enough for one man, with minimal space between bunks to maximize capacity. Like sardines in a can, comments a worker as he helps assemble the frames, but better than freezing outside. The bunks will be filled with straw or pine boughs to create mattresses. Not exactly luxury accommodations, but in the depths of winter, they'll feel like heaven compared to the alternative. The central feature of the bunkhouse interior is the space for the stove. This isn't just a matter of clearing an area. The floor beneath the stove needs special protection, and the roof needs a carefully constructed opening for the stovepipe. Most fires in bunkhouses start at the roof opening, Mackenzie explains as a team works on the chimney hole. Need metal flashing round the pipe, good clearance, no shortcuts here. While one team works on the stove area, others are installing the few windows, small openings covered with oiled paper that will let in some light while keeping out the worst of the cold. Actual glass is too expensive and fragile for a logging camp. Won't see much through these, Schmidt says as he helps you install an oiled paper window, but they'll let in enough light to see who you're playing cards with, and that's about all you need. The door is the final major element. It's built thick and heavy, with extra reinforcement to withstand the pressure of winter winds. It opens inward, a crucial detail in a region where snow can pile up several feet overnight and potentially block an outward opening door. As the third week of construction comes to a close, Mackenzie does a final inspection of the nearly completed bunkhouse. He checks every corner, every chink, the roof, the floor, the stove opening, the windows, and the door, occasionally pointing out minor issues to be addressed. Not bad, he finally pronounces. Should keep you boys alive through winter. Probably. That probably hangs in the air, a reminder of the stakes involved. This isn't just construction, it's survival preparation. In the months to come, this building will stand between 100 men and the lethal cold of a Wisconsin winter. The final touch is the stove itself, a massive cast-iron box that arrives by wagon, along with the cook's equipment and other supplies that couldn't be manufactured on site. It takes 8 men to unload it from the wagon and position it in the centre of the bunkhouse. "Beautiful, isn't she?" says the cook, patting the stove's black iron surface affectionately. "This lady'll keep you warm in January when it's cold enough to freeze your piss before it hits the ground." The stovepipe is assembled and run the length of the building before exiting through the carefully prepared roof opening. The long run of pipe will extract maximum heat from the exhaust gases before they escape outside, an essential efficiency in the depths of winter. That night, as a celebration of sorts, the cook prepares a special meal, and the first fire is lit in the bunkhouse stove. As the men gather in the nearly completed building, there's a palpable sense of accomplishment. What was an empty clearing 3 weeks ago is now a structure capable of housing 100 men through the most brutal conditions nature can deliver. "Built to last, this one," Schmidt says with satisfaction, running his hand along a perfectly notched corner. "Might still be standing 20 years from now." You look around the bunkhouse, mentally cataloguing all the work that went into it. The carefully selected logs, the precisely cut notches, the meticulously applied chinking, the strategically designed roof. Every element represents knowledge passed down through generations of men who learned, sometimes through deadly trial and error, how to survive in this unforgiving environment. Main logging crew arrives next week, Mackenzie announces over dinner. Still need to finish the cookhouse, office and tool shed, but the hard part's done. As you sit by the new stove, feeling its first tentative heat begin to fill the bunkhouse, you realise something. You've helped create more than just a building. You've helped forge a bulwark against the wilderness, a place where men can endure the coming months of darkness and cold. Outside, the September air carries a sharper chill now, and the leaves have begun to turn. Winter is coming, but now you're ready for it. You wake up shivering. The bunkhouse is complete now, and the main crew has arrived, filling the long building with nearly 100 men. October has given way to November, and the first serious cold snap has hit. Last night, the temperature dropped to 15 below zero. Just a taste of what's to come, according to the veterans. The problem? Your bunk is along the north wall, one of the spots furthest from the central stove. While the middle of the bunkhouse stays reasonably warm, the corners can be frigid. Last night, a cup of water you left by your bunk froze solid. "Trade you bunks," says a large Finnish lumberjack named Isaacson when he sees you shivering. "I run hot anyway. Too close to that damn stove and I can't sleep." You're surprised by the offer but grateful. "You sure?" He nods. "Been doing this 15 years. Know how to stay warm anywhere. You're new. Take the warmer spot while you figure things out." This is your first lesson in bunkhouse survival. The community takes care of its own. Veterans look out for greenhorns, teaching them the countless small skills needed to stay alive through the winter months. It's not charity, it's practical. A man who freezes to death or loses fingers to frostbite can't work, and in a logging camp everyone needs to pull their weight. Moving your meagre belongings to the new bunk closer to the stove takes all of 2 minutes. You don't own much. Some extra clothes, a few personal items, a small photo of your family. The logging company provides the tools of the trade. "Smart move, letting Isaacson take that corner," comments Schmidt as he laces up his boots for the day. "Fins are built for the cold. Pretty sure they're part polar bear." Isaacson, overhearing, just laughs. "We're born in the cold, die in the cold, might as well get comfortable with it." The real expert on cold survival, though, turns out to be the chore boy, 16-year-old Danny, whose job is maintaining the bunkhouse stove around the clock. You watch him one morning as he tends the fire with practiced precision. I talked to this historian who spent his career studying these camps, and he told me that in many ways the chore boy was the most important person in camp. If he fell asleep at the wrong time or didn't know exactly how to manage that fire, people died. Crazy responsibility for usually the youngest guy there. "See, it's not just about keeping it hot," Danny explains when he notices your interest. "Too hot and the stovepipe could ignite creosote buildup. Whole place goes up. Too cold and men freeze. Gotta find the balance." Danny's expertise extends beyond simply adding wood. He knows exactly which logs to choose based on the temperature outside and the time of day. Large maple logs for the coldest nights, smaller pieces for more precise control during the day. He can read the colour of the flames and the coals to judge the fire's health. "Most important thing I do is banking the fire at night," he tells you, demonstrating as he speaks. "Rake the coals to the back, cover 'em with fine ash. Acts like a blanket, lets 'em smoulder slow without flaming up. Come morning, just rake away the ash, add kindling, blow on the coals, and boom, fire's back." Using this technique, Danny has kept the bunkhouse fire alive continuously for weeks. This is crucial, as starting a new fire in the depths of winter with everything frozen solid would be challenging at best. "How do you sleep?" you ask him. "If you're tending the fire all night?" 2 hours at a time," he says with a shrug. "Set this little alarm clock in my head. Wake up, tend the fire, go back to sleep. You get used to it." You're not sure you could ever get used to that kind of fractured sleep, but Danny seems to take it in stride. At 16, he's already a seasoned veteran of winter survival. Later that day, an older logger named Gustafson gives you another critical lesson in cold survival, one focused on your clothing. "Layers," he says simply, watching you prepare to head out for the day's work. "Not enough layers there, son." You look down at yourself, confused. You're already wearing a wool shirt, a wool vest, and a heavy coat. "Seems like plenty to me." Gustafson shakes his head. "Watch what the veterans do." And so you do. You observe as the experienced loggers dress for the day, and you're amazed at the systematic approach they take. First comes a thin cotton undershirt. Keeps the wool off your skin, one explains. Then a heavy wool shirt, followed by a wool vest. Some men add a second wool shirt before putting on their mackinaw coat. Pants are similarly layered, long underwear, then heavy wool trousers. Cotton kills, Gustafson tells you bluntly. Gets wet, stays wet, pulls heat from your body. Only use it as that first layer. Everything else is wool. Wool keeps you warm even when wet. Hands and feet get special attention. Most men wear 2 pairs of socks, a thin cotton pair underneath thick wool ones. Boots are greased regularly with a mixture of beeswax and tallow to keep them water resistant. Hands get the same treatment, thin cotton gloves covered by heavy mittens. Why mittens instead of gloves, you ask Gustafson. Fingers keep each other warm in mittens, he replies. Simple math. More skin touching skin. More heat stays where you need it. Headwear is equally crucial. Wool caps pulled low, often with ear flaps that can be tied down in the worst weather. Some men wrap woolen scarves around their lower faces to warm the air before it hits their lungs. Breathe through your nose when it's really cold, advises another veteran. Mouth breathing in 40 below will freeze your lungs. Bad way to go. The amount of knowledge these men possess about cold survival is staggering. Every piece of their clothing, every habit they've formed, is the result of generations of hard-won experience, often paid for in frostbitten fingers and toes, or worse. That evening, as the temperature continues to drop, you get a lesson in another crucial survival skill: drying wet clothes. After a day in the woods, everyone returns with at least some damp clothing, whether from sweat or snow. Wet clothes are not just uncomfortable, they're potentially deadly in this environment. Above the stove runs a network of wires and ropes, creating a makeshift drying rack. Men hang their damp socks, mittens and long underwear from these lines, creating what looks like a strange forest of dangling fabric. The air fills with steam and the distinctive smell of drying wool, a smell that becomes as much a part of bunkhouse life as wood smoke. Don't put 'em too close to the stovepipe, warns Danny as you hang your socks. Catch fire if they touch it when it's really going. Saw a whole bunkhouse burn down that way once. The drying area operates by an unspoken system of rotation. Those whose clothes are dry make room for those whose aren't. There's no arguing, no selfishness. Everyone understands the stakes. Your feet are the most important, Schmidt tells you as you hang your damp socks. Can lose fingers and still work. Lose toes, and you're heading south on the next supply sleigh. This focus on feet extends to bunkhouse routine. Each night, many men perform a ritual that at first seems strange to you. They thoroughly dry their feet by the stove, then carefully inspect each toe for signs of frostbite or trench foot. White or grey spots mean frostbite setting in, Isaacson explains, demonstrating the inspection on his own massive feet. Catch it early, you can save the toe. Wait too long. He makes a chopping motion with his hand. The treatment for mild frostbite is counterintuitive. Never rub it or use hot water, warns Gustafson. Lukewarm water only, gentle. Too much heat too fast will destroy the tissue. For prevention, many men rub their feet with bear grease or other animal fats before putting on fresh, dry socks for the night. The grease creates a moisture barrier and helps prevent chafing. Smells awful, admits a logger named Murphy, as he applies the thick yellowish substance to his feet, but better than losing toes. As November deepens, bringing longer nights and more intense cold, The bunkhouse itself requires constant maintenance to remain an effective shelter. The chinking between logs contracts in extreme cold, sometimes creating gaps that let in bitter drafts. "Gotta check the chinking weekly," Mackenzie announces one Sunday, the only day without regular logging work. "Any man finds a draft near his bunk, report it. We'll fix it today." The repair process is simple but effective. More moss is stuffed into any gaps that have appeared, and a fresh layer of clay mortar applied. In the coldest sections of the bunkhouse, particularly the north wall, a layer of pine pitch is added over the chinking for extra protection. "Sticky mess," comments Schmidt as he helps apply the pitch with a wooden paddle. But wind hits this wall hardest. Extra protection's worth the trouble. The roof receives similar attention. Snow has begun to accumulate, and while its weight helps compress the sod layer and increase insulation, too much snow can stress the structure. 8 men on roof duty, Mackenzie orders. Clear off half the snow, leave enough for insulation. Careful around the stovepipe, that area's clear for a reason. You volunteer for roof duty, curious about this aspect of bunkhouse maintenance. Climbing a rough ladder to the gabled roof, you find yourself standing on what looks like a small snow-covered hill. The sod layer beneath the snow is frozen solid, creating a surprisingly stable surface. Under Gustafson's direction, your team carefully removes excess snow with wooden shovels, being sure to maintain an even distribution and avoid creating low spots where meltwater might pool. Around the stovepipe, all snow is cleared completely in a 3-foot radius to prevent any risk of fire. Snow's actually great insulation, Gustafson explains as you work. Like how igloos work, but too much weight can collapse even the strongest roof. Seen it happen. Back inside, you notice other men engaged in various maintenance tasks. Some are repairing bunks that have begun to squeak or sag. Others are checking the floor for drafts, filling gaps between planks where necessary. A few are cleaning the windows, not for appearance, but to remove frost build-up that blocks precious light. The most critical maintenance, though, focuses on the stove and stovepipe. A build-up of creosote in the pipe can not only reduce efficiency, but also create a serious fire hazard. Every few weeks the pipe must be cleaned. This is a complex operation requiring perfect coordination. First, the fire is allowed to burn down to coals. Then, sections of the stovepipe are carefully removed one by one and cleaned with a specialized brush. The black sooty creosote that comes out is disposed of far from the bunkhouse. Throughout the cleaning, the building rapidly cools, so the work must be done as quickly as possible. Fastest pipe cleaning I ever saw was 12 minutes flat, Danny tells you proudly as he oversees the operation. That's our target. Every minute longer is heat lost. Your crew manages it in 14 minutes. Not record-breaking, but efficient enough that the temperature in the bunkhouse drops only marginally before the roaring fire begins to heat things up again. Beyond these physical aspects of survival, you soon learn there are social elements just as important. The isolation and close quarters of bunkhouse life create a unique culture, with unwritten but rigid rules. "See that bench running along the wall?" Schmidt asks one evening, pointing to the long wooden seat that extends the length of the room in front of the bunks. "That's the deacon seat, most important piece of furniture after the stove." The deacon seat, you learn, is the social centre of the bunkhouse. In the evenings, after supper, men gather here to talk, mend clothes, repair tools, play cards, or simply rest. There's an unspoken hierarchy to who sits where. The veterans claim the prime spots closest to the stove, while newcomers take what's left. "Why is it called a deacon seat, you ask?" Schmidt shrugs. Story goes it's because men sit there proper-like, hands folded, listening to stories, like deacons in church. Probably bull, but that's what they say. Whatever its origin, the deacon's seat is where much of the knowledge transfer happens in a logging camp. Veterans share stories that contain vital survival information, all wrapped up in tall tales and good-natured ribbing. "Remember Jensen, winter of '85?" an old-timer asks one night, addressing the group at large. Nods all around from the veterans. "Got his Mackinaw wet crossing Miller's Creek. Temperature dropped that night. Coat froze solid. Too proud to ask for help drying it. Next morning found him curled up like a baby, frozen stiff as his coat." The old-timer shakes his head. "Pride'll kill you faster than the cold sometimes." Message received. Swallow your pride and ask for help when you need it. In these conditions, stubbornness can be fatal. The bunkhouse has other unwritten rules. Each man's bunk is his castle, the only private space in an otherwise communal life. You never touch another man's belongings or sit on his bunk without invitation. Personal hygiene, limited as it is, becomes a moral imperative. While no one expects cleanliness by city standards, a man who doesn't make some effort to keep himself and his area reasonably clean quickly becomes an outcast. "Johnson, you're ripe as week-old fish," announces a burly logger one evening, addressing a slovenly man whose bunk is becoming notorious for its smell. Either wash them socks or sleep in the stable with the oxen. The ultimatum is delivered with humour, but the message is dead serious. In close quarters, basic standards must be maintained. Johnson grumbles but complies, washing his socks in a bucket of lukewarm water by the stove. Noise is another sensitive issue. With men sleeping at all hours, some just off shift, others just about to start, respect for others' sleep is essential. Loud talking, singing or horseplay is confined to certain hours and areas of the bunkhouse. 7 to 9, evenings, that's social time, Schmidt explains. Otherwise keep it down. Man who wakes up the wrong crew might find his boots mysteriously frozen solid overnight. Even the stove area has its own etiquette. Since it's the most precious resource in the bunkhouse, access is carefully managed. Men whose clothes are truly wet get priority at the drying lines. No one monopolizes the warmth. You warm up, then move aside to let others have their turn. One evening, as a howling blizzard shakes the bunkhouse walls, you join a group on the deacon seat listening to Isaacson, the Finnish logger, explain the concept of sisu. Not just courage, he says, his accent thickening as he searches for the right words, is grit, determination. When everything says stop, you continue. In Finland, we say man with sisu can walk through walls if he must. "We call it pig-headed stubbornness here," jokes Murphy, "but it's the same thing." Laughter ripples through the group, but there's respect in it. Every man here understands that survival in this environment requires that quality, whether called sisu or stubbornness or simply grit. The conversation shifts to various survival techniques from different traditions. The Swedish loggers share their methods for preventing snow blindness, squinting through narrow slits cut in pieces of wood. The French Canadians describe specialized snowshoes they use for deep powder. An Irish logger demonstrates how to predict weather changes by observing subtle shifts in wood smoke patterns. "Sky turns that green-grey colour," adds a veteran from Minnesota. "You drop everything and get back to shelter. Means a blow's coming that'll freeze the balls off a brass monkey." This exchange of knowledge isn't just entertaining, it's vital. Each tip, each technique, represents potentially life-saving information, tested and refined through generations of trial and often deadly error. As you listen, you realize that the true art of survival here isn't just in the physical structure of the bunkhouse, impressive though it is. It's in this accumulated wisdom, passed from veteran to greenhorn, adapted to specific conditions, and embedded in the culture of the logging camp. The bunkhouse itself, with its carefully notched logs and strategic design, is just the first layer of defense against the deadly cold. The second layer is the practices and techniques of survival, the clothing systems, the fire management, the maintenance routines. But the third and perhaps most important layer is the social structure that ensures this knowledge persists and spreads. Later that night, as the blizzard continues to rage outside, you lie in your bunk listening to the wind. It sounds angry, thwarted, like a predator trying to get at prey just beyond its reach. The bunkhouse creaks and settles, but holds firm. The stove glows red in the darkness, Danny's shadow moving occasionally as he tends the fire. You think about the incredible amount of knowledge and skill embedded in this simple structure, the precisely cut notches, the carefully applied chinking, the strategically designed roof. Each element represents generations of hard-won wisdom about how to survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. And now you're part of that tradition. Each day you learn more, not just about how to fell trees, but about how to stay alive in conditions that would kill most people within hours, how to layer clothing, how to recognize the early signs of frostbite, how to maintain the crucial barrier between the deadly cold outside and the life-sustaining warmth within. The wind howls louder, finding every tiny imperfection in the bunkhouse walls. But inside, protected by logs and moss and clay, and the accumulated wisdom of countless winters, you remain warm, not comfortable by city standards perhaps, but alive, and in the frozen north woods in the dead of winter, that's victory enough. A vicious cold snap hits in early December. The temperature plummets to 30 below zero, and the wind picks up, driving needle-sharp crystals of snow that can flay exposed skin raw in minutes. The workday is cut short. Even logging companies recognize that some conditions are too dangerous for men to function in. You stumble back to the bunkhouse with the rest of your crew, frost coating your beard and eyebrows, your toes and fingers numb despite multiple layers of protection. The moment you push through the door, it hits you. The wall of heat radiating from the massive cast iron stove in the center of the room. It's glowing red hot, its thick iron sides almost orange in places. The chore boy, Danny, is carefully feeding it split logs, his face shiny with sweat despite the sub-zero temperatures outside. "Sweet Jesus," mutters Murphy as he peels off his frozen outer layers. "What have you got that thing stoked up to, Danny? Might melt the damn thing." Danny grins, his face illuminated by the glow of the firebox as he closes its heavy door. Mackenzie's orders. Says it's gonna drop to 40 below tonight. Better too hot than too cold. This red-hot heart of the bunkhouse deserves a closer look. So many of us think of heating as just a dial on the wall. Back then, this stove literally stood between life and death. The central stove is no ordinary heating appliance. It's a massive iron beast, 4 feet long, 3 feet wide and 3 feet high, with walls a half-inch thick. The firebox is large enough to swallow logs 3 feet long and a foot in diameter. When fully stoked, it radiates heat with an almost physical presence. You can feel it pressing against your skin from 10 feet away. Cost the company a fortune, Schmidt tells you as you both warm your hands near the stove. Had to bring it in by wagon before the first snow. weighs near 800 pounds. "Worth every penny," replies Gustafsson, hanging his damp socks on the drying lines above. "Remember that camp on Blue River that tried to save money with a smaller stove? Found 'em all froze solid come spring?" You've become friendly with Danny over the weeks, and after supper that evening, you ask if you can watch him tend the stove for a while. You're curious about the techniques that keep this iron heart beating through the coldest nights. "Sure," he says, looking pleased to share his expertise. "Not much to see, but plenty to learn." Danny's modest about his role, but everyone in camp knows the truth. The chore boy's job is perhaps the most critical in the entire operation. If the stove goes out in the depths of winter, men die. It's that simple. "First rule," Danny explains as he checks the firebox, "is never let it go completely out. Ever. Starting a fire from scratch when everything's frozen solid. Nightmare. Keep a coal bed going at all times." He demonstrates how he judges the state of the fire not primarily by the flames, but by the coal bed beneath, the layer of intensely hot embers that provide the steady, consistent heat. The flames may dance dramatically, but it's the coals that do the real work. "Second rule," he continues, "is know your wood. Different woods burn different ways." He points to the neatly stacked piles of split logs along one wall of the bunkhouse. "See how they're sorted? That's sugar maple there. Burns hot and long, low flame but serious heat. That's what I use overnight. Yellow birch there, good steady burn, nice flame. That's daytime fuel. And that stack of split pine, that's for when we need quick heat or a bright light for a bit. Burns fast and flashy but doesn't last." The science of wood is surprisingly complex. Danny can identify a dozen different species by sight, smell and weight, and knows the burning properties of each. This knowledge isn't academic. It's what allows him to maintain the precise heat level needed throughout the changing conditions of day and night. "Third rule," Danny says, lowering his voice slightly, "is always keep a reserve, no matter what." He shows you a hidden cache of perfectly dried split maple logs stored under his bunk. Enough to get through one full night if the regular supply runs out or gets wet. Nobody touches these except in emergency. Camp rule. The existence of this emergency supply speaks volumes about the critical importance of the stove. In a world where every cubic foot of the bunkhouse is precious space, dedicating room to an emergency wood cache is a significant commitment. Fourth rule is know the weather. Danny nods toward the small oiled paper window, now completely covered with frost on the outside. Colder it gets outside, more wood we burn. Wind makes a difference too, drives cold air through every tiny gap. Night like tonight, I'll go through twice the wood of a calm 10 below night. The mathematical precision with which Danny approaches his job is impressive. He doesn't just randomly add wood to keep things hot. He's constantly calculating, adjusting, compensating for changing conditions both inside and outside the bunkhouse. "How do you sleep?" you ask him again, still amazed by his schedule. Waking every 2 hours seems, well, impossible. Danny shrugs. Your body adjusts, and honestly, the cold wakes me if I sleep too long. Stove cools down enough, I feel it in my sleep. The idea that his body has become so attuned to the stove's heat output that it wakes him when the temperature drops even slightly is remarkable. Danny has essentially become a human thermostat. But the really tricky part, he continues, is banking the fire at night. The banking process, you learn, is critical to maintaining heat through the night, while allowing the chore boy some stretches of sleep. Danny demonstrates his technique with practiced efficiency. First, He lets the fire burn down until there's a deep bed of glowing coals but few active flames. Then he uses a metal rake to push these coals to the back of the firebox. Over these, he carefully places several large pieces of sugar maple, the slow-burning hardwood that provides steady heat. The real trick comes next. Danny scoops fine ash from beneath the stove and gently covers the arrangement with a thin layer, almost like tucking it in with a blanket. Ash insulates, he explains. Lets the wood smoulder real slow without flaming up. Come morning, or when I wake for a check, I just rake away some ash, add a bit of kindling if needed, and give it a few puffs of air. He demonstrates this last part, blowing gently on a section of exposed embers until they glow brighter and small flames begin to lick around the wood. Whole art to it, Danny says with justified pride. Do it right. Fire lives for weeks without ever going fully out. Do it wrong. He trails off, but the implication is clear. As the evening deepens and the temperature continues to drop, you begin to notice how the stove affects the social geography of the bunkhouse. The area immediately surrounding the stove, about a 10-foot radius, is significantly warmer than the rest of the building. This creates concentric zones of comfort and activity. Closest to the stove, it's almost uncomfortably hot. This zone is used primarily for drying clothing and warming up immediately after coming in from outside. No one lingers here except Danny, who seems immune to the intense heat. The next zone, from about 10 to 20 feet from the stove, is comfortably warm. This is where most social activity happens in the evening. Card games, conversation, letter writing, tool repair. The deacon seat mostly falls within this radius. Beyond 20 feet, especially in the corners furthest from the stove, the temperature drops noticeably. These areas are primarily used for sleeping, with men relying on wool blankets and shared body heat to stay warm through the night. Ever notice the old-timers sleep furthest from the stove? Schmidt comments, seeing your observations of the different zones. Learn to sleep cool, you adapt better to everything else. This insight explains Isaacson's earlier offer to trade bunks. The veterans actually prefer the cooler sleeping areas, not out of self-sacrifice, but because they've learned that acclimating to cooler temperatures makes all aspects of winter life more manageable. The stove affects more than just heating zones. It creates its own microclimate within the bunkhouse. The air directly above it rises rapidly, creating convection currents that circulate warmth throughout the building. This circulation isn't perfect, hence the colder corners, but it's surprisingly effective. The rising heat carries moisture with it, steam from drying clothes, breath from 100 men, sweat evaporating from bodies. This moisture condenses on the coldest surfaces, primarily the roof and windows, creating steady drips in some areas and thick frost in others. Gotta watch for drips, Gustafson advises, pointing to dark water stains on a few bunks. Get your bedding wet. You're in for a miserable night. Some men rig little gutters out of birch bark to channel the drops away. The moisture issue highlights another crucial function of the stove beyond heating. It helps manage humidity. Without the constant heat creating circulation, moisture would accumulate more quickly on everything, making clothes and bedding chronically damp, a potentially lethal situation in winter conditions. Around 8 o'clock there's an unexpected commotion. The door bursts open, admitting a blast of frigid air and 2 loggers half carrying a third between them. The man's face is alarmingly white, with grey-white patches on his cheeks and nose. Frostbite, announces one of the men helping him. Found him disoriented about a quarter-mile from camp. Must have gotten lost heading back from the North Cut. The injured man is Ellis, a quiet Canadian who keeps to himself. Now he's shivering violently, his speech slurred, his movements uncoordinated, clear signs of hypothermia beyond just the frostbite on his face. "Get him to the stove, slowly," orders Mackenzie, who materializes from his small private room at one end of the bunkhouse. "Don't rush it." The men help Ellis to a bench positioned a careful distance from the stove, close enough to benefit from the heat, but not so close as to warm him too quickly. Someone brings a blanket, which is wrapped around his shoulders. "Danny, water," Mackenzie says. "Lukewarm, not hot." And someone fetch snow, clean snow. The older logger's directives are followed without question. Danny heats water to a precise temperature. "Blood heat, no hotter," he murmurs, testing it with a finger. Someone else returns with a basin of fresh snow. What happens next is a master class in treating cold injuries, knowledge that has been refined through generations of Northwoods experience. Mackenzie gently applies lukewarm water to Ellis's hands and ears, areas with frostbite that aren't as severe. For the more seriously frozen tissue on his cheeks and nose, he uses something unexpected: snow. "Don't rub," he instructs as he demonstrates, very gently pressing clean snow against the grey-white patches. "Just contact." Draws the frost out slowly. The treatment seems counterintuitive, using snow to treat freezing, but you can see it working as circulation gradually returns to the affected areas. The worst outcome would be for the tissue to thaw too quickly, causing cellular damage that could lead to gangrene. Ellis remains by the stove through the night, his condition slowly improving under Mackenzie's watchful eye. By morning, the immediate danger has passed, though the frostbitten areas now look red and blistered. "He'll keep his nose and most of his cheeks," Mackenzie pronounces. "Might lose a bit of the left earlobe. Lucky we found him when we did." The incident is a stark reminder of how quickly the winter environment can turn lethal, even for experienced woodsmen. It also underscores the life-saving importance of the bunkhouse and its stove. Without this refuge and its carefully maintained heat, Ellis would almost certainly have died. The stovepipe, you notice, is almost as important as the stove itself. Made from sheet iron and 8 inches in diameter, it runs the full length of the bunkhouse before exiting through the roof. This long run is intentional. It extracts maximum heat from the exhaust gases before they escape outside. "Clever design," comments Schmidt when he sees you examining it. "Stovepipes like having a second heater running the length of the building. Finns call it a heat grabber, same idea as their masonry heaters back home. The pipe radiates heat along its entire length, helping to distribute warmth more evenly throughout the bunkhouse. Without this extended run, the areas furthest from the stove would be significantly colder, perhaps dangerously so in the worst weather. This efficient design doesn't come without risks, however. The long pipe accumulates creosote, a flammable build-up of tar and soot, more quickly than a shorter one would. This necessitates the regular cleaning you participated in earlier, a process that becomes even more critical as winter deepens and the stove runs hotter for longer periods. "Chimney fire in a place like this," Gustafsson says with a grim shake of his head. "Death trap. Whole place would go up in minutes. Fire is the dark twin to cold, the other lethal threat that constantly looms over the bunkhouse. The very stove that keeps the cold at bay brings with it the risk of catastrophic fire, especially in a wooden building filled with highly flammable materials." This explains the almost religious care with which Danny and others maintain the stove and pipe. As the night progresses, you observe another ritual centered around the stove, the rotation of sleeping positions, Men whose bunks are furthest from the heat source occasionally get up, warm themselves by the stove for a few minutes, then return to their bunks. This cycle continues through the night, with men instinctively taking turns so the area around the stove doesn't become overcrowded. "Old camp trick," whispers Schmidt when he notices you watching. "Sleep an hour, warm up 5 minutes, sleep another hour. Keeps the blood flowing." By midnight, the bunkhouse has settled into its nighttime rhythm. The stove glows steadily in the centre, Danny's careful banking having created a stable heat output that will last for hours with minimal attention. Most men are in their bunks, huddled under wool blankets. A few night owls remain on the deacon seat, speaking in hushed tones or working on small projects by the light of the stove's glow. Outside, the temperature continues to drop. The logs of the bunkhouse contract in the extreme cold, creating occasional sharp, cracking sounds like gunshots. The wind moans around the eaves, searching for ways in, but inside, wrapped in layers of wool and warmed by the steady radiation of the stove, life continues. You drift into a light sleep, only to be awakened some time later by movement nearby. It's Danny, moving quietly through the bunkhouse to check the stove. You check your pocket watch, 2:15 a.m., right on schedule. You watch through half-closed eyes as he rakes away some ash, exposes glowing coals beneath, and adds 2 precisely selected pieces of maple. His movements are economical, practiced, almost ritualistic. Within minutes, the stove is radiating renewed heat, and Danny returns to his bunk for another 2 hours of sleep. This cycle will repeat itself throughout the night, with Danny waking like clockwork every 2 hours to tend the fire. His dedication is remarkable, especially considering he's the youngest member of the crew. His vigilance is the thread upon which all your lives hang during these frigid winter nights. Morning comes with brutal swiftness. The cook's triangle sounds at 4:30 a.m., rousing men from warm bunks into the relative chill of the bunkhouse. Even with the stove burning steadily, the temperature has dropped during the night, especially in the farthest corners. Danny is already up, having transformed the carefully banked overnight fire into a roaring blaze that fills the stove with dancing flames. Men gather around it, warming themselves before beginning the process of dressing for the day ahead. The morning routine revolves around the stove as much as the evening one did. Men take turns warming boots before putting them on. Cold leather is stiff and uncomfortable. Layers of clothing are warmed briefly before being donned. Some men heat their axes near the stove, making the metal easier to sharpen with files before the day's work. 42 below last night, announces Mackenzie, returning from a check of the outdoor thermometer. Might not work the north cut today, too exposed to the wind. There's no grumbling at this news. Every man knows that working in such extreme temperatures isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. Even breathing can become hazardous, as the intensely cold air can damage lung tissue if inhaled directly through the mouth. Breakfast in the cookhouse provides a welcome respite. The cooking stoves have been blazing since 3:30 a.m., making the building almost tropically warm compared to the bunkhouse. Men linger over their food, reluctant to head out into what promises to be a brutally cold day. Eventually, though, work calls. The logging company has contracts to fulfill, and unless conditions are truly life-threatening, the cutting, limbing and skidding of trees must continue. Men bundle up in multiple layers, covering every inch of skin possible, and head out to face the frozen world. You're assigned to work with Schmidt and 2 others in a relatively sheltered area, cutting smaller spruce for railroad ties rather than the massive white pines used for lumber. It's still bitter cold, but the dense stand of trees provides some protection from the worst of the wind. Keep moving, Schmidt advises as you take up your position with a crosscut saw. Stop moving, you start freezing. Simple as that. The work is hard enough that it generates significant body heat, keeping you relatively comfortable despite the frigid air. Still, any pause in activity is immediately noticeable. Within seconds, the cold begins to seep through your layers of wool, reminding you of its constant presence. By midday, clouds have moved in, bringing with them a new threat: snow. Not the light, powdery snow of extreme cold, but heavier flakes that suggest the temperature has actually risen slightly. Blizzard coming, predicts Gustafsson, glancing at the darkening sky. Might be a bad one. Snow this heavy with temperature this low. Not good. Mackenzie makes the call around 2 in the afternoon. All crews to return to camp immediately. The snow is falling harder now, reducing visibility to less than 100 yards. Wind is picking up too, driving the snow horizontally and creating the first hints of drifts. The return to camp is tense, with crews staying close together to avoid anyone getting separated and lost. By the time you reach the clearing where the buildings huddle against the elements, the blizzard is in full force. The bunkhouse is barely visible through the curtain of white, despite being only 50 yards away. Inside, Danny has the stove roaring. He's been preparing for the early return of the crews, building up the fire to its maximum safe output. The heat hits you like a physical force as you enter, a welcome assault after hours in the numbing cold. Gonna be a bad one, Mackenzie announces to the assembled men once everyone is accounted for. Might last 2-3 days according to the barometer. We'll ride it out here. No one leaves the buildings without my say-so. A blizzard lockdown is serious business. It means the camp is effectively cut off from the outside world until conditions improve. If anyone were injured or became seriously ill during this time, there would be no way to get them out to medical help. The central role of the stove becomes even more apparent as the blizzard intensifies through the afternoon and evening. Men cluster around it, warming themselves after the day's work and drying clothes soaked not by melted snow, it's too cold for that, but by sweat that froze within the layers. Keep the clothes moving, Danny instructs, managing the drying area with the authority of someone much older. Dry to the outside, wet to the inside. Everyone gets a turn. The stove affects more than physical comfort. It shapes the social atmosphere as well. As the howling wind makes the outside world seem increasingly hostile, the warm circle around the stove becomes a place of camaraderie and storytelling. Reminds me of the winter of '79, says an old-timer named Johansson. Blizzard so bad we couldn't see the cookhouse from the bunkhouse door. Had to string ropes between buildings so men wouldn't get lost going to meals. This prompts other veterans to share their own blizzard stories. Tales of men lost just feet from safety, of snow piled to the eaves, of winds strong enough to topple trees. Some of the stories may be embellished, but their core message is deadly serious. Respect the power of winter. As night falls, the blizzard's fury increases. Wind shrieks around the bunkhouse, finding every tiny imperfection in the chinking between logs. Snow piles against the walls and drifts over the lower portions of the windows, gradually cutting off what little natural light remains. But inside, illuminated by the red glow of the stove and a few carefully placed lanterns, life continues. Card games form on the deacon seat. A few men write letters home by lantern light. Others repair tools or mend clothing. The Finnish contingent breaks out a harmonica and begins a low, melancholy tune that somehow perfectly matches the storm's howling. Through it all, the stove stands as the literal and figurative heart of the bunkhouse. Its steady heat keeps the deadly cold at bay. Its light provides a focal point in the growing darkness. Its need for regular tending gives structure to the hours of confinement. As you prepare for sleep that night, with the blizzard still raging outside, you reflect on how completely your existence has come to revolve around this single cast iron object. In the city, heat is an assumption, an afterthought. Here, it's the central preoccupation of every day. The stove isn't just a convenience or a comfort, it's the difference between life and death. Its steady heart, maintained by Danny's vigilant care, will beat through the night, keeping 100 men alive in conditions that would kill an unprotected human in hours. Outside, the temperature has dropped again, and the wind drives snow through any gap it can find. Inside, men sleep in rough bunks, wrapped in wool blankets, their breath forming small clouds in the cooler air away from the stove. And at the centre of it all, the iron heart glows red in the darkness, holding the frozen world at bay for another night. The blizzard rages for 2 full days, keeping everyone confined to the camp buildings. When it finally breaks on the 3rd morning, a new world emerges, one transformed by snow. Drifts tower against the bunkhouse, some reaching nearly to the eaves. The path to the cookhouse has completely disappeared, requiring a team with shovels to re-establish the route between buildings. 3 feet of new snow, announces Mackenzie after surveying the camp. Maybe 4 in places. Gonna make for some interesting work. That's an understatement. Deep snow fundamentally changes every aspect of logging operations. Moving through the forest becomes an exhausting slog. Felled trees disappear into snowdrifts, requiring extra work to locate and extract them. Tools get lost in the white expanse, sometimes not to be found until spring thaw. But the logging industry waits for no man, and certainly not for weather. The day after the blizzard, normal operations resume, though with adjustments for the challenging conditions. All right, listen up, Mackenzie announces at breakfast. Snow's too deep for normal work in some sections. Schmidt's crew will break trails first. Isaacson's team will focus on clearing snow from logs already down before the storm. Rest of you, regular cutting but in areas closest to existing trails. The cook bangs his triangle at 4:30 a.m. like always, jolting you from sleep. After 3 months in camp, you've developed something of a routine, though you wouldn't call it comfortable yet. First priority upon waking, check your boots. You keep them under your bunk overnight to prevent them from freezing. Still, they're cold and stiff as you pull them on over 2 pairs of socks. Thin cotton inner, thick wool outer. Next comes the multiple layers of clothing. Long underwear, wool pants, undershirt, wool shirt, wool vest, and finally the heavy Mackinaw coat you'll carry until you're outside. Dressing is a deliberate process. Rush it, forget a layer, and you might pay with frostbite. You're getting faster, comments Schmidt, who's already fully dressed and rolling a cigarette with his thick fingers. Only took you 10 minutes today. You grunt in response, still not fully awake. The bunkhouse is dimly lit by a few lanterns and the red glow of the stove. Men move around in the half-light, a choreography of dressing and preparation that's become almost instinctual after months together. Outside, the world is still pitch black. The stars blaze overhead with an intensity you never saw in the city, their cold light reflecting off the snow to create an ethereal landscape of deep blue shadows and silver highlights. The cookhouse windows glow yellow in the darkness, a beacon guiding the half-awake men across the packed snow path. Inside, the heat is immediate and welcome. The long tables are already set with tin plates and cups, and the air is thick with the smell of frying salt pork and coffee. "Special treat today, boys," announces the cook as you find your regular spot at the table. "Flapjacks with real maple syrup. Company sent it up with the last supply sled." This news generates more excitement than you might expect. In a world where the menu rarely varies, even small changes become significant events. The maple syrup, a luxury in the Northwoods winter, is a topic of animated conversation as men fill their plates. A typical breakfast is enormous by city standards. A stack of 8 to 12 pancakes, half a pound of salt pork, and several cups of coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. You've learned to eat it all, knowing that the calories are necessary fuel for the day ahead. "Wonder where we'll be cutting today," muses a logger named Peterson between mouthfuls of pancake. "Hope it's not that section up on the ridge. Wind'll be brutal up there after the storm." Mackenzie, who always eats quickly at the head table, stands to address the crew as most are finishing their meals. He lays out the day's assignments with military precision, naming crew leaders, cutting areas, and specific objectives. There's a system to his planning. Crews rotate through different cutting areas and different types of work to prevent exhaustion and maintain efficiency. "Schmidt, take your crew, including the greenhorn here, to Section 8, he says, nodding toward you. "Good white pine there and relatively sheltered from the wind. Expect 3 logs per man minimum today." By 5:30 a.m, breakfast is over, and men begin heading to the tool shed to collect their equipment for the day. The sky is still dark, though a faint lightening on the eastern horizon suggests dawn isn't far off. The tool shed is a sacred place in its own way. Axes, saws, cant hooks and peavies hang in precise arrangements on the walls. Each man has his assigned tools, many of which they've personally modified for balance and comfort over years of use. "New edge on your axe yesterday," the tool maintenance man tells you as he hands over your equipment. "Should hold better in this cold." The axe head gleams in the lantern light, its cutting edge honed to razor sharpness. A dull axe is worse than useless in the woods. It's dangerous, requiring more force and increasing the risk of glancing blows. Your crew assembles near the edge of camp. Schmidt checks that everyone has the necessary equipment, then leads the way into the forest. Walking through deep snow requires a specific technique that you've gradually mastered over the winter, a high-stepping motion that's exhausting but effective. "Break trail in shifts," Schmidt orders. 2 men up front for 15 minutes, then rotate back. Save strength. The men at the front have the hardest job, ploughing through untouched snow to create a path for those behind. It's brutal work, especially in drifts that reach mid-thigh. By the time your turn at the front comes, dawn has broken, revealing a forest transformed into a crystalline wonderland by the storm. Reach the historian who told me these guys burned 6,000 calories a day. For context, Olympic swimmers like Michael Phelps eat about 8,000 during intense training. Just walking through that snow was like running a marathon. And then they had to cut down trees all day. Every surface bears a thick blanket of snow. The pines are especially beautiful, their branches bending under white loads that occasionally release in small avalanches when disturbed by wind or a passing squirrel. In other circumstances you might appreciate the beauty more. Now, with sweat already forming under your layers despite the bitter cold, you're mostly concerned with the practical challenges the snow presents. It takes nearly an hour to reach the designated cutting area, a stand of mature white pines that somehow survived previous logging operations. The trees are magnificent straight trunks rising 120 feet or more, with the first branches starting at least 60 feet up. Each tree represents hundreds of board feet of valuable lumber. "We'll take this one first," Schmidt decides, pointing to a particularly impressive specimen. "Jacobson, you and Murphy on the saw. Rest of us will clear the base." Before a tree can be cut, the snow around its base must be cleared away to allow the sawyers proper access. This is done with wooden shovels and by simply trampling the snow down with snowshoes. It's important work. A sawyer standing in deep, unstable snow is at serious risk when the tree begins to fall. Once the base is clear, the real work begins. Jacobson and Murphy position themselves on opposite sides of the massive trunk with a crosscut saw between them. The saw is a beautiful tool in its own way, 6 feet of tempered steel with precisely shaped teeth designed to cut in both directions. "Watch and learn, Greenhorn," Schmidt tells you. "These two are the best sawyers in camp." The men begin with a smooth, rhythmic motion that belies the enormous effort involved. Pull, push, pull, push. Each stroke removes a small amount of wood, the saw teeth cutting cleanly through the frozen pine. They don't rush, maintaining a steady pace that they can sustain for the time it takes to cut through the 3-foot diameter trunk. "Always start with the face cut," Schmidt explains as you watch. "That V-shaped notch determines which way the tree falls. The direction of fall is critical. Drop a tree in the wrong place, and it might get hung up in the branches of another tree, a dangerous situation that requires additional risky work to resolve. Or worse, it might fall toward the crew, with potentially fatal consequences." While the sawyers work on the face cut, you and the others prepare escape routes, cleared paths leading away from the tree at 45-degree angles from the expected line of fall. When a 120-foot pine comes down, you need to be well clear of both the trunk and the branches, which can snap off and become deadly projectiles. After about 20 minutes of steady sawing, the face cut is complete. A neat V-shaped notch on the side of the trunk facing the intended direction of fall. Now comes the back cut, made on the opposite side of the trunk, slightly above the bottom of the face cut. When she starts to go, drop the saw and move, Schmidt advises the sawyers. No tree's worth dying for. The back cut progresses steadily, eating into the trunk from the opposite side. When approximately 2 inches of wood remain between the back cut and the point of the face cut, the tree begins to show signs of movement, a subtle leaning, almost imperceptible at first. "She's going," calls Jacobson. "Timber!" This traditional warning shout alerts everyone in the vicinity that a tree is falling. The sawyers drop their saw and move quickly along the prepared escape routes. The rest of the crew does the same, eyes fixed on the tree as it begins its fall. For a moment the massive pine seems to hesitate, as if reluctant to relinquish its century-old stance. Then gravity takes hold, and the fall accelerates. The crack of separating wood echoes through the forest, followed by the whoosh of the tree displacing air as it plummets. When it strikes the ground, the impact shakes the earth beneath your feet. Snow explodes outward from the point of impact, and branches snap with reports like gunshots. For a moment after the tree comes to rest, there's silence, as if the forest itself is acknowledging the fall of one of its giants. Then work resumes immediately. No time for reflection in a logging operation. There are quotas to meet. "Limbing team, get to it," Schmidt orders. "Bucking team on standby." The limbing process involves removing all branches from the fallen trunk, transforming it from a tree to a log. This is primarily axe work, requiring precision and care to avoid injury. The branches are cut flush with the trunk, leaving a smooth surface that won't snag during transportation. "Watch for spring poles," warns an experienced limber as you join him in clearing smaller branches. Snow's bent a lot of these down. Cut wrong, they'll snap up like a whip. Spring poles are branches or smaller trees that have been bent and trapped under the weight of the fallen tree. When cut improperly, they can release with tremendous force, causing serious injuries or even death. Identifying and safely dealing with them is one of many specialized skills required for survival in logging work. Once the limbing is complete, the bucking team takes over. Their job is to cut the trunk into manageable lengths, typically 16 feet for saw logs destined for the lumber mill. This again involves the crosscut saw, with careful measurements to ensure maximum value from the tree. "Measure twice, cut once," Schmidt reminds the buckers. "Company doesn't pay us to waste good timber." By mid-morning, the first tree has been transformed from a living pine to a series of neatly trimmed logs ready for transport. The process will be repeated dozens of times throughout the day, with different men rotating through the various roles to distribute the physical strain. Lunch is eaten where you work. There's no returning to camp midday. From your pocket you pull the food prepared by the cook before dawn, a thick sandwich of cold roast beef between slices of dense bread, wrapped in oiled paper to keep it from freezing solid. There are also a couple of molasses cookies and a small metal flask of tea that's still barely warm. Keep the sandwich inside your coat for 10 minutes before eating, Schmidt advises, demonstrating with his own lunch. Warms it up a bit. The men eat quickly, huddled in whatever shelter they can find from the wind. There's little talk. Everyone is focused on the food and on conserving energy. Despite the enormous breakfast consumed just hours earlier, you're ravenously hungry. The constant physical exertion in cold conditions burns calories at an astonishing rate. After a brief rest, no more than 30 minutes, work resumes. The afternoon brings new challenges as fatigue begins to set in. This is when accidents are most likely to happen, and the crew leaders become more vigilant, watching for signs of dangerous exhaustion. "Take 5, Schmidt orders when he notices a Sawyer team's rhythm becoming irregular. Rather lose 5 minutes now than lose a man to a mistake. These short breaks are strategic, just long enough to catch your breath and restore focus, but not so long that muscles cool down and stiffen. Staying warm through continuous movement is essential in these temperatures. As the afternoon progresses, the felled trees accumulate, creating small clearings in what was once dense forest. Each log is marked with the company's stamp indicating ownership. Later, teams with horses or oxen will arrive to skid the logs to the nearest road or frozen stream, beginning their journey to the sawmill. Around 4:30 p.m, with daylight fading, Schmidt makes the call to rest cutting for the day. Now comes another challenging part of the job, the return to camp through deep snow carrying tools, with tired muscles and the temperature dropping as evening approaches. "Keep up," he orders as the crew forms a line for the trek back. "Stay together, lights going fast." The return journey takes almost as long as the morning one, despite following the broken trail. Exhaustion makes the snow seem deeper, the distance longer. By the time the camp buildings come into view, with warm light spilling from their windows, you're operating on willpower alone. The transition from forest to camp follows a precise routine developed to maintain equipment and prevent injury. First stop is the tool shed, where axes and saws are carefully cleaned, oiled and stored for the next day's use. dull edges are noted for overnight sharpening by the maintenance man. Good edge equals good work, Schmidt reminds everyone as they turn in their tools. Take care of your tools, they take care of you. Next comes the bunkhouse, where wet outer layers are removed and hung to dry near the stove. The process of unwrapping from winter gear is almost as time-consuming as dressing in the morning. Each layer must be evaluated. Anything damp needs to be dried before morning, or it will be worse than useless the next day. Get those socks up on the line, Gustafsson calls to a younger logger, who's collapsed onto his bunk, still partially dressed. Wake up with wet socks tomorrow. You'll regret it all day. There's a brief window of time between returning to camp and the supper bell. Perhaps 45 minutes that each man uses according to his needs. Some immediately lie down on their bunks, stealing a short nap before the meal. Others gather near the stove, warming stiff muscles and discussing the day's work. A few attend to personal chores, mending clothes, writing letters, carving small wooden items to pass the time. You've developed your own routine, focused primarily on foot care. Removing your boots and socks, you carefully inspect your feet for any signs of frostbite or trench foot, the constant winter enemies of the lumberjack. Then you massage them back to life before putting on dry socks, preparing for the short walk to the cookhouse. At precisely 6 p.m, the cook's triangle sounds, signalling supper. Despite bone-deep fatigue, no one misses this meal. It's not just sustenance, but the main social event of the day. The cookhouse is transformed in the evening, while breakfast is consumed in the half-dark by men still shaking off sleep. Supper is a more convivial affair. Lanterns provide bright light, and the day's work provides common ground for conversation and storytelling. Tonight's meal is typical of logging camp fare. Roast beef in thick slices,